I was 28 when I met Eric at Sarah's birthday dinner, and I knew right away he was exactly the kind of man I should be with. Not the most exciting guy in the room, sure, but stable, reliable, the type who would treat me well and never make me wonder where I stood. He had this quiet confidence that I found attractive, and when he asked for my number at the end of the night, I gave it to him with a smile that let him know he was lucky to get it. Our first few dates were nice enough. Eric took me to decent restaurants, opened doors, paid the check without making a big deal about it. He wasn't the most spontaneous person I'd ever dated, but after a string of guys who couldn't even commit to weekend plans, his consistency felt refreshing. When he suggested I move in with him after 6 months, it seemed like the natural next step. He had a nice apartment, a good job, and he clearly adored me. I'd be crazy not to see where things went. The proposal came exactly when I expected it would, 1 year after we met, at the same restaurant where we'd had our first date. Eric had this whole speech planned about how I'd changed his life and made him want to be a better man. It was sweet. Really, even if the ring was a little smaller than I'd hoped for. But I said yes because Eric represented everything I'd told myself I wanted. Security, devotion, and a man who would put our relationship first. Our wedding was beautiful, not huge, but elegant, and I looked absolutely stunning in my dress. Eric cried when he saw me walking down the aisle, which was exactly the reaction I'd wanted. We honeymooned in Hawaii, and for those 2 weeks, everything felt perfect. I had chosen well, I told myself. I had found a man who would worship me and build a stable life around making me happy. The first few years of marriage were comfortable. Eric worked his steady job, while I focused on making our home beautiful and maintaining my friendships. We fell into routines that worked for both of us. Dinner together most nights. Weekend errands. Occasional date nights to keep things interesting. Eric was attentive and affectionate, always asking about my day and remembering little things that mattered to me. I felt satisfied with my choice. Proud even. While my single friends dealt with dating drama and heartbreak, I had locked down a good man who treated me like a queen. But somewhere around year 5, I started feeling restless. Our conversations had become predictable. Our routines felt more like ruts. And I began noticing how Eric would just assume I'd be content with whatever he planned for us. Movie nights became him picking what we watched. Dinner conversations revolved around his work stress or his family drama. When I tried to talk about my own interests or dreams, he'd listen politely but then steer things back to practical matters like our budget or home repairs. I found myself staying up later, scrolling through social media while Eric snored beside me. I'd see posts from college friends traveling to exotic places or starting exciting new careers, and I'd wonder what my life might have looked like if I'd made different choices. Not that I regretted marrying Eric. Exactly. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was disappearing into this safe, boring existence he'd created for us. That's when Mitchell messaged me on Facebook. We'd dated briefly in college, nothing serious. But he'd been fun and spontaneous in ways that Eric never was. His message was casual, just saying he'd been thinking about old times and wondering how I was doing. I stared at it for probably 10 minutes before responding, my heart beating faster than it had in months. We started chatting regularly after that, just catching up at first. He told me about his job in marketing, his recent divorce, how he'd been thinking about people from college lately. I found myself looking forward to his messages in a way that felt both exciting and slightly guilty. Mitchell remembered things about me that Eric had never even known, like how I used to write poetry or my dream of backpacking through Europe someday. You always had such a creative spirit. He wrote one evening while Eric was watching some boring documentary in the living room. I hope you haven't lost that spark. The comment made me realize how long it had been since anyone had seen me as interesting or dynamic. Eric loved me, sure, but he loved the version of me that fit neatly into his orderly world. Our conversations gradually became more personal. Mitchell would ask about my marriage in this careful way that made it clear he was fishing for information about whether I was happy. I found myself being more honest than I probably should have been, admitting that things with Eric had become routine and that I sometimes felt like I was sleepwalking through my own life. You deserve to feel alive. Mitchell wrote back, "You deserve someone who sees how amazing you are." I started looking forward to his messages more than anything else in my day. When Eric would launch into another story about office politics or his mother's health problems, I'd nod along while mentally composing what I'd tell Mitchell about it later. Mitchell made me feel like the vibrant, interesting person I used to be, instead of just Eric's reliable wife who had dinner ready and the house clean. After a few weeks, Mitchell suggested we talk on the phone. I waited until Eric was at his weekly poker game to call him, and hearing his voice again sent butterflies through my stomach. We talked for 2 hours about everything. Our college memories, our current lives, our dreams for the future. Mitchell had this way of making me laugh that I'd forgotten I missed. I keep thinking about that weekend we spent at the lake junior year. He said during one of our calls, "You were so carefree and beautiful. I was an idiot to let you get away." I knew I should have ended the conversation there. Should have told him I was happily married and couldn't continue talking like this. But instead, I found myself saying, "I think about that weekend sometimes too." Things escalated from there. Mitchell started asking for pictures. Just casual selfies at first. But the way he'd respond made me feel desirable in a way I hadn't felt in years. "You're even more beautiful now than you were in college," he'd text back, along with heart eye emojis that made me smile despite myself. We started making plans to meet up. Mitchell suggested a weekend in Gatlinburg, somewhere romantic where we could catch up properly, without any distractions. I knew exactly what he meant, and the fact that I was seriously considering it should have been a wake-up call. But instead, I found myself researching hotels and thinking about what I'd pack. The guilt was there, of course, but I pushed it down by focusing on all the ways Eric had been taking me for granted lately. He barely looked up from his phone during dinner anymore. He'd stopped planning romantic surprises or even complimenting my appearance. When was the last time he'd asked about my dreams, or made me feel like anything more than a comfortable roommate he occasionally slept with? I convinced myself that what I was doing with Mitchell wasn't really cheating. We were just talking, just reconnecting as old friends. The fact that we had history and were planning to meet up didn't necessarily mean anything physical would happen. And even if it did, maybe that's what I needed to figure out what I really wanted from my life. But as the weeks passed, I realized I couldn't keep living this double life forever. I was becoming distant with Eric, less affectionate, more irritable when he tried to engage me in conversation. He started asking if everything was okay, and I'd brush him off with complaints about work stress or feeling tired. The truth was, I was tired of pretending to be satisfied with our boring routine when Mitchell was showing me how exciting my life could be. Finally, I decided I needed to be honest with Eric about what I was feeling, not about Mitchell specifically, but about needing space to figure out who I was and what I wanted. We were married, yes, but that didn't mean we couldn't take a step back and evaluate whether we were truly happy together. I waited until after dinner on a Tuesday night, when Eric was relaxed and in a good mood. "I think we need to take a temporary break," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and reasonable. Eric looked up from his laptop with this confused expression. "A break? What does that even mean when you're married?" A break from what exactly? I had rehearsed this conversation in my head, so I was ready with my explanation. "I just need time to figure out who I am. I feel like I'm losing myself in this routine we've fallen into. I love you, but I need some space to grow as a person." "No," Eric said, just like that, plain and simple. "We're not dating. We're married. If there's a problem, we work through it together. If you want to leave, leave. But don't insult me by asking for a break like I'm some boyfriend you can put on pause." His reaction caught me off guard. I'd expected him to be upset, maybe even hurt, but I thought he'd at least consider what I was asking for. Instead, he was being completely inflexible, shutting down the conversation before we could even discuss it properly. "You're not listening to what I'm actually saying," I told him, feeling my frustration rise. "I'm trying to be honest with you about what I need, and you're just dismissing my feelings." "What feelings?" Eric shot back. "You haven't told me anything specific. You just want to break to find yourself like we're in some romantic comedy. What does that even mean practically? Do you want to date other people? Do you want me to move out? What exactly are you asking for here?" I could hear the anger building in his voice, which only made me more defensive. "I'm asking for understanding from my husband. I'm asking for space to figure out what's missing from my life without you making it all about your insecurity." "Insecurity?" Eric's voice got louder. "You just told me you want to break from our marriage, and I'm supposed to be secure about that. You're talking like I'm some obstacle to your happiness instead of the person you promised to build a life with." "Maybe that's because you are being an obstacle," I snapped back. "When's the last time you asked me what I wanted out of life? When's the last time you made me feel like anything more than your convenient wife who keeps your house clean and your dinner warm?" Eric stared at me for a long moment, and I could see something shifting in his expression. "So this is about me not being exciting enough for you, not appreciating you enough. What exactly do you want me to do differently?" "I want you to understand that I need room to breathe," I said. "I want you to stop being so controlling and trust that taking some time apart might actually help us in the long run." "Controlling?" Eric's voice was quiet now, which somehow felt more dangerous than when he was shouting. "I'm controlling because I don't want my wife to take a break from our marriage. Because I think married people should work through their problems together instead of running away." We argued for another hour, going in circles. Eric refused to even consider the idea of a temporary separation, and I became more convinced that his stubbornness proved my point about feeling trapped. He kept demanding specifics about what I wanted. and I kept explaining that I needed space to figure that out. Finally, I got so frustrated that I went to bed early, leaving him on the couch with his laptop, lying there in the dark. I felt more certain than ever that I was making the right choice. Eric's reaction had shown me exactly how little he understood me or cared about my personal growth. Mitchell would never be so rigid and controlling. Mitchell actually wanted me to be happy and fulfilled, even if that meant taking risks or making changes. I texted Mitchell that night, telling him about the conversation and how Eric had completely shut me down. "I'm sorry he's being so unreasonable." Mitchell wrote back, "You deserve someone who supports your journey of self-discovery. Maybe this is the universe telling you something." The next morning, Eric was different. Not angry anymore, but cold in a way I'd never seen before. He made his coffee and breakfast without offering to make mine, got dressed for work without his usual goodbye kiss, and left the house without saying more than "see you" later in this flat tone. I figured he was pouting about our argument and would get over it once he had time to think about what I'd said. Men always needed time to process emotional conversations, and Eric was probably just feeling defensive about the idea that our marriage wasn't perfect. Give him a few days, I thought, and he'd come around to understanding my perspective. But Eric's cold behavior continued for the rest of the week. He came home from work, ate dinner mostly in silence, and spent his evenings either on his laptop or watching TV without trying to include me. When I tried to bring up our conversation again, he'd just say he was thinking about it and change the subject. Meanwhile, Mitchell and I were texting constantly. He was being so supportive about everything, telling me how proud he was that I was standing up for myself and refusing to settle for less than I deserved. We finalized our plans for Gatlinburg the following weekend, and I felt this mix of excitement and nervousness that reminded me of being 21 again. "I can't wait to see you." Mitchell texted, "It's been way too long since I've been able to hold you." I stared at that message for a while, knowing that responding positively would cross a line I couldn't uncross. But Eric's behavior over the past few days had only confirmed that our marriage was already in trouble. Maybe spending time with someone who actually appreciated me would give me the clarity I needed about what I really wanted. "I can't wait either," I texted back. But Eric never gave me the chance to go to Gatlinburg. The following Tuesday, I was having lunch at my usual spot near work when this man in a suit walked directly to my table and said, "Caitlin Morrison." "Yes," I said, confused about why a stranger knew my name. "You've been served," he said, handing me a thick envelope before walking away. My hands were shaking as I opened it and saw the divorce papers inside. I felt this weird, hollow feeling in my stomach, like someone had just told me the most obvious thing in the world. But somehow I wasn't ready to hear it. Around me, my coworkers were trying to pretend they weren't staring, but I could feel their eyes on me as I sat there holding legal documents that meant my marriage was over. I called Eric immediately, but it went straight to voicemail. I tried again. Same thing. Panic was setting in as I realized he must have been planning this for days. Maybe since our argument about the break. All that cold, distant behavior wasn't him pouting. It was him preparing to leave me. I texted him frantically from my car in the parking lot. "Eric, please call me. We need to talk about this. I know you're hurt, but we can work through it. Please don't do something we'll both regret." No response. I tried calling again, and this time I heard the automated message that my number had been blocked. "Are you kidding me?" I drove straight to our house, hoping to catch him there, but his car wasn't in the driveway. I used my key to get inside, and that's when I saw that half his stuff was already gone. His clothes, his books, his stupid collection of baseball cards. All of it packed up like he'd been planning this for weeks. I called in sick to work and spent the rest of the day trying to reach him through every possible channel. I called his office, but his assistant said he was unavailable. I tried his friends, but they either didn't answer or claimed they didn't know where he was. I even drove to his mother's house, but she just looked at me sadly and said Eric had asked her not to discuss his personal business with anyone. Finally, around 8 that evening, I got a single text from a number I didn't recognize. "I told you I don't do breaks." That was it. 7 years together. 6 years of marriage. And that's how he wanted to end things, with some cryptic message that made it sound like this was all my fault for asking for space. I tried responding to the number, pouring out everything I'd been holding back, how I hadn't actually done anything wrong, how Mitchell and I were just friends catching up, how I'd never even met him in person since college. I explained that I was confused about my feelings, but that didn't mean I wanted to end our marriage. I reminded him of all the good years we'd had together and begged him to at least talk to me before making such a drastic decision. "I didn't think you'd actually leave me," I wrote. "I thought you knew me better than that. I thought you'd fight for us." But there was no response. The number I'd texted seemed to be disconnected or blocked as well. The next 2 months were a nightmare. Eric's lawyer was efficient and ruthless, pushing through the divorce proceedings as quickly as possible. My own lawyer kept asking if I wanted to try mediation or counseling, but Eric's side made it clear that reconciliation wasn't an option. He wanted out, and he wanted it done fast. I barely heard from Mitchell during this time. When I told him what had happened, he seemed supportive at first, but then he started taking longer to respond to my messages. Our planned weekend in Gatlinburg got postponed indefinitely, and eventually he stopped bringing it up altogether. The court hearing was humiliating. Eric sat there in his best suit, looking calm and composed, while I struggled not to cry in front of the judge. When the judge asked if there was any possibility of reconciliation, Eric didn't even hesitate. No, Your Honor, I no longer trust her. Just like that. 6 years of marriage dismissed because he no longer trusted me. As if I was some criminal instead of his wife, who had asked for space to work through some personal issues. I tried to explain to the judge that Eric had blindsided me, that we'd had one argument and suddenly I was being served divorce papers at work, like some kind of public spectacle. But Eric's lawyer had done his homework. Somehow they knew about my conversations with Mitchell, about our plans to meet up, about everything I thought was private between us. The divorce was finalized that day. No alimony. Since we'd both been working and hadn't been married long enough, the lease on our apartment was in my name, so I got stuck with that. Eric got his freedom, and apparently that was all he'd wanted. I heard through our mutual friend Denise that Eric had completely transformed his life after our divorce. Lost 20 pounds, started going to therapy, took up meditation and journaling. He'd been traveling solo, taking weekend trips to places we'd never been together, and apparently looked better than he had in years. Meanwhile, Mitchell had ghosted me completely. After 2 months of sporadic texting, he just stopped responding altogether. When I finally worked up the courage to call him, his number was disconnected. I found out through social media that he'd gotten back together with his ex-wife and moved to another state. 10 months after the divorce was finalized, Denise told me she'd run into Eric at a coffee shop. He was with some friends, laughing and looking genuinely happy in a way she said she'd never seen before. When she mentioned that she still talked to me sometimes, Eric just nodded politely and said he hoped I was doing well. He seems really at peace, Denise told me, like genuinely content with his life. It's actually kind of amazing how much he's changed. I wanted to ask if he'd mentioned me at all, if he ever wondered how I was doing or regretted how things ended. But I already knew the answer from the way Denise was carefully not meeting my eyes. Sitting in my apartment that night, I tried to make sense of how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. All I'd wanted was some space to figure out what was missing from my life. I'd never intended to hurt Eric or destroy our marriage. I just needed him to understand that I was feeling trapped and needed room to grow. But instead of working with me, he'd chosen to blow up everything we'd built together. Instead of fighting for our relationship, he'd given up at the first sign of trouble. And now he was supposedly living his best life while I was alone in an apartment I couldn't really afford, wondering what the hell had happened to the future I'd planned. Maybe Eric was right that I shouldn't have asked for a break. Maybe I should have just pushed through my restless feelings and focused on being grateful for what we had. But his reaction proved that he never really understood me anyway. A husband who truly loved his wife would have been willing to work through a rough patch instead of immediately running to a divorce lawyer. People keep asking me if I'm dating again, if I'm ready to get back out there, but honestly, the whole experience has left me feeling exhausted. Mitchell turned out to be just as selfish as Eric, just in a different way. And the dating apps are full of men who are either looking for hookups or have more baggage than I want to deal with. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever find someone who actually gets me, who sees my need for excitement and growth as a positive thing instead of a threat. Someone who won't punish me for being honest about my feelings or make me feel guilty for wanting more than just comfortable routine. But mostly I try not to think about Eric at all anymore. What's the point? He made his choice, and apparently he's perfectly happy with it. I just wish he could have been mature enough to have a real conversation about our problems instead of reacting like some dramatic teenager who thinks divorce is the solution to everything. At least now I know what I'm looking for in my next relationship. Someone who won't be intimidated by my independence, who will encourage me to explore my potential instead of trying to keep me in some safe little box. Someone who understands that love means supporting each other's growth, even when it's uncomfortable or uncertain. Eric never understood that. And honestly, maybe it's better that I found out sooner rather than later. I'm only 35. I still have time to find someone who actually deserves me,